The wind howled across the platform as Josephine Garner clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the biting autumn air of 1873 making her shiver despite her layers. The last passenger had departed the train station at Yuba City, California, leaving her alone with nothing but the distant mountains for company and a single trunk containing everything she owned in this world. "Last call for Sacramento," the conductor shouted, not even glancing her way as he climbed back aboard the steam engine. Josephine opened her mouth to speak, to explain that she hadn't meant to exit here, that her ticket was meant for Sacramento where her supposed fiancé was waiting. But the words died on her lips as the train whistle blew and the great iron beast lurched forward, leaving her stranded at a station she'd never intended to visit. "No, please wait," she called, but her voice was lost beneath the rumble of wheels on tracks. She'd only stepped off to stretch her legs during the brief stop, and now her journey was cut short by carelessness. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched her future disappear down the tracks. The platform attendant, an elderly man with a permanent scowl, was already locking up the station house. "We're closing, miss. Nothing more coming through until tomorrow afternoon." "But my trunk," Josephine gestured helplessly to her luggage, sitting abandoned on the weathered wooden planks. "I have nowhere to go." The man merely shrugged. "Town's that way." He pointed down a dirt road. "Might find a room at Miller's boarding house if you're lucky." She stood there, 22 years old and completely alone, more than 2,000 miles from her home in Boston. The weight of her situation crashed over her like a wave. She'd sold everything to come west and marry a man she'd only corresponded with through letters, a man who would now think she'd changed her mind when she didn't arrive in Sacramento. As the station attendant disappeared inside, locking the door behind him, Josephine sank onto her trunk and buried her face in her hands. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the platform. She had no idea where to go or what to do. The meager coins in her purse wouldn't last long, and she knew no one in this dusty little town. "Excuse me, madam." The deep voice startled her. Josephine looked up to find a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he stepped closer, she could make out a rugged face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. Dust clung to his denim trousers, and his chambray shirt had seen better days. A revolver hung at his side, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, kind eyes, the color of summer sky. "Appears you've been left behind," he said, gesturing to her trunk and the now empty tracks. She quickly wiped away her tears with the back of her gloved hand. "Yes, I'm afraid I stepped off when I shouldn't have. My ticket was for Sacramento." The man nodded slowly, taking in her fine clothes and Eastern accent. "That's a fair piece from here. Next train's not till tomorrow afternoon." "So I've been told," she said, attempting to sound braver than she felt. He studied her for a moment longer, then extended his hand. "Finn Yates, miss. I run the Double Y Ranch just outside of town." Josephine hesitated before accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused but warm. "Josephine Garner. I'm pleased to make your acquaintance, Mr. Yates. Where were you headed in Sacramento, if you don't mind me asking?" She straightened her spine. "I was to meet my fiancé. We've been corresponding for 6 months. He placed an advertisement for a bride, and I answered." Something flickered in Finn's eyes, pity, perhaps, or concern. "I see. And now he'll be waiting with no bride arriving." "Yes." The single word carried the weight of her despair. Finn glanced at the setting sun, then back at her. "Miss Garner, Yuba City's no place for a lady alone after dark. There's decent lodging in town, but—" He paused, looking at her elegant dress and then at the trunk. "May I?" When she nodded, he bent down and picked up her trunk with surprising ease. "This is mighty heavy for a lady to manage alone." "It contains everything I own," she admitted. He nodded thoughtfully, then straightened his shoulders as if coming to a decision. "Miss Garner, I can see you're in a difficult situation. I will take care of you." The words were simple, direct, but they carried a weight of sincerity that made her breath catch. "You don't even know me, Mr. Yates." "I know enough to see you're a lady in need of assistance," he replied. "My ranch has a small guest cabin where you'd be perfectly proper and safe for the night. Come morning, we can figure out how to get word to your intended in Sacramento, or get you on tomorrow's train if that's what you wish." Josephine weighed her options. trust a stranger, a cowboy, or spend the night alone in an unfamiliar town with dwindling funds. Something about his steady gaze and the respectful way he kept his distance while still offering help made her decision easier. Thank you, Mr. Yates. I accept your kind offer. He nodded once, hefting her trunk onto his shoulder. My wagon's this way. It's not fancy, but it'll get us to the ranch before full dark. Following him off the platform, Josephine cast one last glance at the empty tracks. Whatever fate had intended by leaving her here in Yuba City, she would have to make the best of it at least until tomorrow. Finn's wagon was simple but well-maintained, with a team of 2 bay horses stamping impatiently. He secured her trunk in the back and offered his hand to help her onto the wooden seat. The leather was cracked but clean, and he handed her a wool blanket as soon as she was settled. Nights get cold in these parts, especially coming off the mountains, he explained, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. As they set off down the dirt road, Josephine found herself studying the cowboy from the corner of her eye. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense that Boston society would recognize. His face was too weathered, his jaw too stubborn. But there was something compelling about his profile and honesty and strength that she couldn't deny. How long have you had your ranch, Mr. Yates? She asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Going on 8 years now, he replied, keeping his eyes on the road. Started with nothing but 20 acres and 3 cows. Now I've got 500 acres and a decent herd. There was quiet pride in his voice, enough to keep a man busy from sunup to sundown. You manage it alone? Got 3 hands who help with the cattle. Good men. And Mrs. Holloway comes up from town 3 days a week to cook and keep the house from falling to ruin. A small smile touched his lips. She says a man living alone will either starve or drown in his own dirt eventually. Despite her situation, Josephine found herself smiling. She sounds like a wise woman. Terrifying is more like it. But she's kept me fed these past 5 years. He glanced at her. What about you, Miss Garner? What brings a Boston lady all the way to California to marry a man she's never met? Josephine looked down at her gloved hands. My father passed away last year. The business debts took everything. There was nothing left for me in Boston. She raised her chin slightly. Mr. Jenkins, my fiancé, wrote beautiful letters. He described his home in Sacramento, his business importing goods from San Francisco. He seemed kind, educated. And now he'll be waiting at the station with no bride arriving. Finn said quietly. Yes. The thought made her stomach twist. He'll think I changed my mind. We can send a telegram first thing tomorrow, Finn offered. Explain the situation. She nodded, grateful for his practical suggestion. Thank you, Mr. Yates. The road grew rougher as they left the main thoroughfare, climbing slightly into rolling hills dotted with oak trees. In the distance, Josephine could make out a cluster of buildings and the silhouettes of cattle against the darkening sky. Double Y, Finn said, following her gaze. Not much to look at compared to what you're used to, I expect, but it's home. As they drew closer, Josephine could see a modest but well-built ranch house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, a corral, and a smaller cabin set a little distance from the main house. Everything spoke of care and hard work, not wealth, but something perhaps more valuable, stability. Finn brought the wagon to a stop in front of the small cabin. This is where Mrs. Holloway stays when winter weather makes it too dangerous to return to town. It's simple but clean. He hopped down and came around to help her descend from the wagon. His hands were strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her down, and Josephine was acutely aware of how proper Boston ladies would be scandalized by such familiar contact. Yet there was nothing improper in his manner, only courtesy. Finn carried her trunk to the cabin door and set it down while he retrieved a key from his pocket. Mrs. Holloway was just here yesterday, so everything should be in order. He unlocked the door and stepped back, allowing her to enter first. The cabin was indeed simple, just one room with a small iron stove in the corner, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair by the single window. But it was spotlessly clean, with dried wildflowers in a jar on the table and fresh curtains at the window. It's lovely, Josephine said sincerely. After the long train journey and the shock of being stranded, the cozy space seemed like a sanctuary. Finn brought in her trunk and set it at the foot of the bed. I'll get a fire started for you. Nights get cold. She watched as he efficiently laid kindling and wood in the stove, his movements sure and practiced. Within minutes, a cheerful fire was crackling behind the iron grate. "There's a pump just outside for water," he said, straightening. "And I'll bring you over some supper from the main house in a bit, if that's agreeable." "You're very kind, Mr. Yates." He ducked his head slightly, almost embarrassed by her gratitude. "It's nothing, just being neighborly." After Finn left, Josephine sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the exhaustion that had been building all day. This wasn't at all how she had imagined her arrival in California. By now, she should have been meeting Arthur Jenkins, the man whose letters had given her hope after months of despair. Instead, she was in a stranger's cabin, dependent on the kindness of a rugged cowboy who looked nothing like the sophisticated businessman she'd expected to marry. Yet there was something about Finn Yates that inspired trust, a steadiness that made her feel safe despite the uncertainty of her situation. Josephine rose and moved to her trunk, unlocking it to retrieve her nightclothes and toiletries. Beneath the carefully packed dresses and petticoats lay a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, Arthur's letters, filled with promises of a comfortable home and a respectable position in Sacramento society. She touched them briefly, wondering what he was thinking now as the train arrived without her. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Garner, I brought you some supper." She quickly closed the trunk and went to open the door. Finn stood there with a tray containing a steaming bowl of stew, fresh bread, and a cup of coffee. "I'm afraid it's nothing fancy," he said, handing her the tray. "Just beef stew and sourdough bread. Mrs. Holloway left it yesterday." "It smells wonderful," she assured him. "Thank you." He nodded, then hesitated. "If you need anything during the night, the main house is just yonder. Don't be afraid to come knock." "I'll be fine, Mr. Yates. You've done more than enough already." He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute. "First thing tomorrow, we'll ride into town and send that telegram to your intended. Get this misunderstanding cleared up." As he turned to go, Josephine suddenly didn't want to be alone with her thoughts. "Mr. Yates." When he paused, she gestured to the table. "Would you care to join me? There's plenty here for two, and I wouldn't mind the company." Surprise flickered across his face, followed by a moment of consideration. "I wouldn't want to impose." "You wouldn't be imposing at all." She set the tray on the table. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "Let me just see to the horses first. I'll be back directly." When he returned a few minutes later, Josephine had divided the stew and bread between two plates. She'd also found a small oil lamp in a cupboard and lit it, casting a warm glow over the table. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers. Finn removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door, revealing thick sandy hair in need of a trim. He sat somewhat awkwardly, his large frame making the simple chair look small. "I realized I haven't properly thanked you," Josephine said as they began to eat. "You've shown extraordinary kindness to a complete stranger." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with praise. "Anyone would have done the same." "I don't believe that's true," she said softly. "Tell me about your ranch, Mr. Yates. You said you started with almost nothing." The question seemed to ease his discomfort. As they ate, he told her about coming west after the war, working as a hired hand for years before scraping together enough to buy his first parcel of land. He spoke of drought years and good years, of learning the cattle business through trial and error. "What about family?" she asked. "Do you have any nearby?" A shadow passed over his face. "Lost my parents before the war. No siblings. Closest thing to family I've got is my foreman, Charlie Davis. Known him since we fought together at Shiloh." "I'm sorry," she said, understanding all too well the loneliness of being without family. "What about you?" he asked. "You mentioned your father, but is there no one else back in Boston?" Josephine shook her head. "My mother died when I was 16. No siblings. My father was, well, he was better with books than business. When he passed, the creditors took everything. That's why you answered an advertisement for a bride," Finn said, understanding in his eyes. "Yes." She looked down at her empty plate, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "Not very romantic, is it? But Mr. Jenkins' letters were kind, and he offered security, a home." "Nothing wrong with wanting security," Finn said quietly. "We all need somewhere to belong." His words touched something deep inside her. Josephine had never thought of her arrangement with Arthur Jenkins in terms of belonging only survival. But now, sitting across from this straightforward cowboy in his simple cabin, she wondered if she might have been searching for something more than just financial security all along. "It's getting late," Finn said, rising from the table. "I should let you rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." "Of course." She stood as well. "Thank you again for the meal and your hospitality." He collected his hat from the peg. "Sleep well, Miss Garner. We'll sort everything out tomorrow." After he left, Josephine prepared for bed, washing with cold water from the pump outside before changing into her nightgown. As she slipped beneath the quilt, she found herself thinking not of Arthur Jenkins and his promises, but of Finn Yates and his quiet strength. She fell asleep to the unfamiliar sounds of the California countryside, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through oak trees, and somewhere far off, the lonely howl of a coyote. Dawn arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin's small window. Josephine woke feeling more rested than she had in weeks, despite the strangeness of her surroundings. The events of yesterday came rushing back: the missed train, the stranding at Yuba City, and the cowboy who had come to her rescue. She dressed quickly in one of her simpler dresses, a blue cotton that would be practical for the journey into town. As she pinned up her dark hair, she heard a knock at the door. "Miss Garner? Are you awake?" Finn's voice called. "Yes, just a moment." She quickly finished with her hair and opened the door to find him standing there with another tray, this one bearing a pot of coffee, 2 cups, and a plate of biscuits. "Thought you might like some breakfast before we head to town," he said. "I'm afraid it's just coffee and biscuits." Mrs. Holloway would be scandalized at the meager offering. Josephine smiled. "It's perfect, thank you." They sat at the small table again, and Josephine found herself studying Finn in the morning light. He looked even more rugged than he had yesterday, with a day's growth of beard shadowing his jaw. But his blue eyes were clear and direct as he poured coffee for them both. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said, passing her a cup. "The telegraph office opens at 8. We can send word to Mr. Jenkins explaining what happened. Then, if you still want to continue to Sacramento, there's a train at 2 o'clock. "That seems sensible," she agreed, though the prospect filled her with unexpected ambivalence. Just yesterday, reaching Sacramento and meeting Arthur had been her singular focus. Now, she found herself curiously reluctant. "Unless—" Finn hesitated, then continued carefully. "Unless you're having second thoughts about the whole arrangement." Josephine looked up sharply. "Why would you think that?" He shrugged. "Sometimes fate has a way of intervening when we're headed down the wrong path." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Was he suggesting her missed train was more than just bad luck? "I made a commitment," she said firmly. "Mr. Jenkins is expecting me. He paid for my train ticket." Finn nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course. I didn't mean to overstep." They finished breakfast in somewhat awkward silence. As Josephine helped clear the dishes, she found herself wondering what had prompted Finn's comment. Did he think she was making a mistake? Or was there something else behind his words? By 8 o'clock, they were in Finn's wagon heading toward town. The morning was crisp and clear, with the Sierra Nevada mountains visible in the distance. As they traveled, Finn pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, gradually easing the tension that had formed during breakfast. "Yuba City's grown a fair bit since I first came through," he told her as the town came into view. "Gold rush brought people initially, but it's the land that's kept them. Some of the richest soil in California." Josephine took in the dusty main street with its wooden sidewalks and false-fronted buildings. It was smaller than she'd expected, but busy with morning activity, shopkeepers opening their establishments, women carrying market baskets, cowboys tying up horses outside the saloon. Finn brought the wagon to a stop in front of a small building with Western Union Telegraph painted on its window. He helped Josephine down, once again his hands firm but respectful at her waist. "What exactly should I say to Mr. Jenkins?" she asked as they entered the telegraph office. "The truth," Finn suggested. "That you accidentally disembarked at the wrong station and will be on today's train to Sacramento." The telegrapher, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, looked up as they approached his counter. "Help you folks." "The lady needs to send a telegram to Sacramento," Finn explained. Josephine dictated a brief message explaining her situation to Arthur and assuring him she would arrive on the afternoon train. The telegrapher counted the words, calculated the cost, and Josephine reached for her reticule to pay. "I've got this," Finn said quietly, placing coins on the counter before she could protest. "Mr. Yates, you've already done so much, please," he interrupted. "Consider it my contribution to setting things right." There was something in his tone that made her study his face more carefully. Despite his generosity, Finn didn't seem particularly enthusiastic about helping her reunite with Arthur. The realization sent a curious flutter through her chest. "When can we expect a reply?" Finn asked the telegrapher. The man shrugged. "Depends on if your party is at the telegraph office in Sacramento. Could be minutes, could be hours. We'll check back," Finn decided. "In the meantime, Miss Garner, perhaps you'd like to see a bit of Yuba City?" The suggestion was unexpected but not unwelcome. "I would like that very much." They spent the next hour walking along the main street, with Finn pointing out various establishments and introducing her to several townspeople they encountered. Everyone greeted him with obvious respect, and Josephine couldn't help but notice the curious glances thrown her way. "You're quite well regarded here," she observed as they left the general store, where the proprietor had insisted on giving her a small bag of peppermint candies on the house. Finn looked embarrassed. "Small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business." "And what is your business beyond ranching?" she asked. "You seem to be more than just a local cowboy." He hesitated before answering. "I serve on the town council. Help settle disputes sometimes. Nothing formal. A peacekeeper, then? Something like that." He glanced at the clock on the bank building. "We should check if there's been a reply to your telegram." When they returned to the telegraph office, the operator handed Finn a yellow slip of paper. "Came through about 10 minutes ago." Finn passed it to Josephine without reading it. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the paper and read the brief message. "N.O. Arthur Jenkins at this address. Stop. Building vacant 3 months. Stop. Western Union, Sacramento." Josephine read the words twice, unable to comprehend their meaning. "This can't be right," she whispered. Finn frowned. "What is it?" She handed him the telegram, watching as his expression darkened. "I don't understand," she said. "His letters came from that address. He was supposed to meet me at the station today." Finn carefully refolded the telegram. "Miss Garner, I think we need to have a private conversation. Would you join me for coffee at the hotel restaurant?" Still dazed, Josephine nodded and allowed him to guide her to the Yuba Hotel, a modest 2-story building at the end of the main street. The restaurant was nearly empty at mid-morning, and they were shown to a quiet table near the window. After ordering coffee for them both, Finn leaned forward, his expression grave. "I need to ask you something, and I apologize in advance for the personal nature of the question. Did you send money to this Mr. Jenkins? For any reason?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "Yes," she admitted. "He explained that establishing a proper home for us required certain expenditures. I sent him the remaining funds from my father's estate, $300. Finn's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of that." "You think he deceived me?" Josephine said, the reality beginning to sink in. That there never was an Arthur Jenkins. "It's a common enough scheme," Finn said gently. "Target women in difficult circumstances, promise them marriage and security, then disappear once they've sent money." Humiliation washed over her, hot and overwhelming. How could she have been so naive? The fine stationery, the educated language, the detailed descriptions of a life in Sacramento, all lies crafted to separate her from what little she had left. "I have nothing," she whispered, the full impact of her situation crashing down around her. "No money, no prospects, no home to return to." Finn reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his. "You're not without options, Miss Garner." "What options?" she asked bitterly. "I'm stranded in a town where I know no one, with barely enough money for a night's lodging." "You know me," Finn said quietly, "and I meant what I said yesterday. I will take care of you." She pulled her hand away. "I don't need charity, Mr. Yates. It's not charity I'm offering." His blue eyes held her steadily. "My ranch is prospering, but the house needs a woman's touch. Mrs. Holloway does what she can, but she's getting on in years. I've been thinking for some time about finding someone to help manage the household properly. You're offering me employment?" Josephine asked, surprise momentarily overriding her distress. "Yes, room, board, and a fair wage." No obligations beyond the work itself. He paused. At least until you decide what you want to do next. Josephine stared at him, trying to process this unexpected development. Why would you do this for a stranger? Something flickered in Finn's eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Let's just say I recognize someone who's been dealt a bad hand through no fault of their own. She considered his offer. The alternative was using her meager remaining funds to secure passage back to Boston, where nothing but debt and painful memories awaited her. Or trying to find employment here in Yuba City, where she knew no one except the man sitting across from her. What exactly would my duties entail? She asked finally. Relief softened Finn's features. Keeping the house in order. Planning meals. Eventually, perhaps overseeing the garden and hen house. Nothing you couldn't manage, I'm certain. It wasn't the future she had envisioned when she left Boston. But then, that future had been built on lies. This, at least, was honest work offered by a man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness. I accept, Josephine said, straightening her shoulders. On a trial basis. For both our sakes. Finn smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged face. That's fair. Shall we shake on it? He extended his hand across the table. As Josephine placed her gloved hand in his calloused palm, she couldn't help but feel that despite the cruel deception that had brought her to California, perhaps fate had not been entirely unkind after all. The ride back to the Double Y Ranch was filled with practical conversation. Finn explained more about the running of the ranch, the 3 cowhands who lived in the bunkhouse, the seasonal work patterns, the weekly visits from Mrs. Holloway. She'll still come to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry, he assured Josephine. I wouldn't expect you to manage everything alone. I appreciate that, Josephine said. Though I should warn you, my domestic skills are somewhat limited. I was raised with servants. You'll learn, Finn said simply. And I'm not expecting perfection. As the ranch came into view, Josephine saw it with new eyes, not as a temporary shelter, but as her home for the foreseeable future. The main house was larger than she'd initially realized, with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides and multiple chimneys suggesting several rooms. You'll stay in the guest cabin tonight, Finn told her as they approached. Tomorrow we can move your things to the house. There's a proper bedroom that Mrs. Holloway has kept ready, though we've never had cause to use it. A man emerged from one of the outbuildings as they pulled up, tall and lean, with dark hair turning silver at the temples. He approached the wagon with a curious expression. Charlie, Finn called in greeting. This is Miss Josephine Garner. She's going to be staying on as our housekeeper. The man touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Miss Garner, Charlie Davis, foreman of this outfit. His sharp eyes took in her fine clothes and Eastern bearing, clearly wondering at her story, but too polite to ask. Mr. Davis, Josephine acknowledged. I'm pleased to meet you. Charlie, would you mind seeing to the team? Finn asked. I want to show Miss Garner around the place. Of course, boss. Charlie took the reins as Finn helped Josephine down from the wagon. The tour of the ranch was both overwhelming and enlightening. The main house was solidly built with 6 rooms, a large kitchen with a proper cook stove and pump, a dining room, a sitting room with bookshelves that surprised Josephine with their contents, and 3 bedrooms, only one of which was occupied by Finn. This would be your room, he said, showing her a sunny chamber at the back of the house. It was simply furnished with an iron bedstead, a bureau, a small writing desk, and a rag rug on the wooden floor. It's plain, but you're welcome to make changes as you see fit. It's lovely, Josephine said honestly. After the uncertainty of the past day, the simple room represented security she had not expected to find. Outside, he showed her the vegetable garden, currently between seasons, the chicken coop where 24 hens scratched and clucked, the smokehouse, and the spring house where milk and butter were kept cool. It's quite an operation, she observed. It's taken years, Finn acknowledged. Started with just the main house 1 room back then, and added on as I could afford to. By the time they returned to the guest cabin, the sun was beginning to set, casting golden light across the rolling pastures. Josephine felt exhausted but strangely at peace. The devastating discovery of Arthur Jenkins' deception had been balanced by Finn's unexpected offer. I'll bring you supper again, Finn said as they reached the cabin door. Tomorrow we can start fresh. Mr. Yates, she said, stopping him as he turned to go. I want to thank you properly. Not many men would have extended such kindness to a woman in my position. He studied her face for a long moment. You don't need to thank me, Miss Garner. Having someone to care for the house will be a blessing. We're helping each other. But they both knew it was more than a simple business arrangement. In offering her employment, Finn had given her something more valuable than money. He had given her dignity when she might have been forced to beg or accept charity. Nevertheless, she said softly, "Thank you." A slight flush colored his weathered cheeks. "You're welcome. I'll be back with supper shortly." After he left, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process the dramatic turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. Yesterday, she had been en route to marry a man she'd never met. Today, that dream had been exposed as a cruel deception, yet she found herself with a roof over her head and honest work to do. And then there was Finn Yates himself, a man unlike any she had known in Boston. Direct, honest, competent in the way that men were, who worked with their hands and lived by their wits. A man who had looked at a stranded woman and seen not an object of pity but a person deserving of respect. For the first time since learning of Arthur Jenkins' deception, Josephine allowed herself to believe that perhaps her journey west had not been a terrible mistake after all. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Josephine woke early, determined to begin her new role with energy and purpose. She dressed in her plainest dress, still far too fine for ranch work, she realized, and had just finished pinning up her hair when a knock came at the door. It was Charlie Davis, the foreman, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Garner. Boss asked me to help move your trunk to the main house whenever you're ready." "Good morning, Mr. Davis. I'm ready now." Together they walked to the main house, Charlie carrying her trunk with ease. He was more talkative this morning, explaining various aspects of the ranch as they went. "Been with Finn since he bought this place," he told her. "Watched him build it up from nothing. He's a good man, fair to work for." "You were in the war together?" Josephine asked, remembering what Finn had mentioned. Charlie nodded. "Shiloh, Vicksburg, Atlanta. Saw the worst of it. Finn saved my life twice over." He glanced at her. "Don't talk about it much, either of us. But wanted you to know he's a man you can trust." "I believe he is," she said quietly. The kitchen was warm when they entered, with coffee already brewing on the stove. Charlie carried her trunk to the bedroom Finn had shown her yesterday, then excused himself to attend to his duties. Josephine found Finn at the kitchen table, studying what appeared to be accounts in a leather-bound ledger. "Good morning," she said. He looked up, a smile warming his features. "Miss Garner, I hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." She glanced around the kitchen. It was clean but utilitarian, with simple crockery stacked on open shelves and cast-iron pans hanging from hooks. "Coffee?" he offered, rising to pour her a cup. "Thank you." She accepted the mug, noticing how careful he was not to let their fingers touch. "I'm eager to begin my duties. Perhaps you could tell me your usual routine." Over the next hour, Finn explained the rhythm of life at the Double Y. The men rose before dawn and took breakfast at 6, usually coffee, bacon, eggs, and biscuits. Dinner, the main meal, was served at noon when they came in from morning work. Supper was simpler, often just beans, bread, and whatever meat was available, served when the day's work was done. "Mrs. Holloway usually prepares meals when she's here," Finn explained. "Other days, we manage for ourselves. Nothing fancy." "I can cook," Josephine assured him, though her experience was limited to the few dishes she'd learned from their cook in Boston before financial circumstances had forced them to let the servants go. "There's a recipe book in that drawer," Finn said, pointing. Mrs. Holloway wrote down some of the basic meals we're accustomed to. Josephine retrieved the book, a simple notebook filled with neat, practical instructions for hearty ranch fare. "This will be very helpful." "Thank you." He rose from the table. "I need to join the men. They're moving cattle to the north pasture today." He hesitated. "Will you be all right here alone?" "Of course," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll familiarize myself with the house and begin planning meals." Finn nodded, seemingly reassured. "Mrs. Holloway comes tomorrow. She can help you settle in properly." After he left, Josephine took a deep breath and surveyed her new domain. The kitchen was well equipped but clearly organized by men with functionality rather than efficiency in mind. She spent the morning rearranging cupboards and taking inventory of supplies, occasionally consulting Mrs. Holloway's recipe book. By noon, she had managed to prepare a simple meal of ham, beans, and cornbread. Her heart raced with unexpected nervousness as she heard the men approaching the house, their boots heavy on the porch steps. Finn entered first, followed by Charlie and two younger men she hadn't met. All four looked hot, dusty, and hungry. "Miss Garner, this is Tom Reynolds and Jack Miller." Finn introduced the other two hands. "Boys, this is Miss Garner. She'll be keeping house for us from now on." The young men mumbled shy greetings, clearly uncomfortable in the presence of a lady. Josephine smiled warmly, determined to put them at ease. "Dinner is ready," she said. "Please sit down." The meal was a success, despite her limited cooking experience. The men ate heartily, complimenting her cornbread especially. Josephine found herself warming to her new role as she watched them enjoy the simple food she'd prepared. "This is right fine, Miss Garner," Tom said as he accepted a second helping. "Been a while since we had proper cornbread between Mrs. Holloway's visits." "Thank you," she said, pleased by the genuine appreciation. "I'm afraid my cooking skills are rustic at best, but I'm eager to learn." "Tastes just fine to me," Finn said, his blue eyes meeting hers across the table with approval that made her cheeks warm. After the men returned to work, Josephine continued exploring the house. The sitting room contained a surprisingly extensive library, classics like Shakespeare and Milton alongside practical volumes on animal husbandry and California agriculture. A well-worn Bible sat prominently on a small table beside the most comfortable chair, its leather cover softened by years of handling. She was dusting the bookshelves when a small daguerreotype in a silver frame caught her attention. It showed a much younger Finn in a Union Army uniform, his expression serious but his eyes recognizable. Beside it was another image, an older couple, presumably his parents, the woman bearing Finn's same steady gaze. "They died in '59. Influenza." Josephine started at Finn's voice, not having heard him enter. "I'm sorry," she said, carefully replacing the frame. "You must miss them. Every day." He came further into the room, removing his hat. "Pa left me enough to head west after the war. Wanted me to have land of my own." He glanced around the room. Don't think he imagined California, but I like to think he'd approve. "I'm sure he would," Josephine said softly. "You've built something remarkable here." Finn seemed embarrassed by her praise. "Came in to see if you needed anything from town. Charlie's heading in for supplies." "That's kind of you to ask." Josephine considered. "Perhaps some fabric, if it's not too much trouble? For curtains and such. The house could use a woman's touch." "Of course." His eyes moved around the plain room. "Choose whatever you think best." "The house is your domain now." "Your domain." The words gave her a curious sense of belonging she hadn't expected to feel so soon. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. I think, under the circumstances, you might call me Finn," he suggested. "Since we're sharing a roof now." The informality should have shocked her, but somehow it felt right. "Then you must call me Josephine," she replied. A smile touched his lips. "Josephine," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "It suits you." The moment stretched between them, filled with something Josephine couldn't quite name, a sense of possibility, perhaps. Then Finn cleared his throat and stepped back. "I should get back to the men," he said. "Supper at 6? "I'll have it ready," she promised. As the days passed, Josephine settled into life at the Double Y Ranch with surprising ease. Mrs. Holloway, a formidable woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and capable hands, proved to be a valuable ally. Rather than resenting Josephine's presence, she seemed relieved to have someone younger to share her responsibilities. "About time this place had a proper woman in charge," she declared after inspecting Josephine's reorganization of the kitchen. "Men don't understand how a house should function." Under Mrs. Holloway's tutelage, Josephine's domestic skills improved rapidly. She learned to bake bread that didn't resemble building bricks, to preserve the garden's bounty for winter, and to manage the household with efficiency. The fabric Finn had sent from town was transformed into cheerful curtains for the kitchen and sitting room. Small touches began to appear throughout the house: wildflowers in jars, neatly folded linens, polished furniture that had previously been dulled by neglect. As October gave way to November, Josephine found herself increasingly content with her new life. The physical work was demanding but satisfying in a way her previous existence had never been. There was pride in creating a comfortable home, in seeing Finn and the men return from long days of work to hot meals and clean surroundings. And then there was Finn himself. Their relationship remained strictly proper employer and housekeeper, but Josephine couldn't deny the growing warmth between them. In the evenings, they often sat in the sitting room together, Josephine sewing or knitting while Finn read aloud from one of his books. Sometimes they simply talked, sharing stories of their lives before circumstances had brought them together. She learned that he had studied at a small college in Pennsylvania before the war, that he had a talent for sketching that he rarely indulged, that he dreamed of expanding the ranch to include orchards as well as cattle. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, her love of music, her father's scholarly pursuits that had unfortunately never translated to business acumen. She found herself able to speak of painful memories that she had kept locked away, and Finn listened without judgment. "Do you ever regret answering that advertisement?" he asked one evening as they sat before the fire. November had brought cooler temperatures, and the first winter storms were threatening in the mountains. Josephine considered the question seriously. "I regret being deceived," she said finally. "I regret losing what little money I had, but I don't regret coming west." She looked up from her sewing to find him watching her intently. "If I hadn't, I wouldn't be here now." Something flickered in his eyes, a warmth that made her heart beat faster. But all he said was, "I'm glad you're here, Josephine." "So am I," she replied softly. The moment might have deepened into something more, but they were interrupted by Charlie bursting through the door, his face grim. "Storm's coming in faster than expected," he reported. "Barometers dropping like a stone. We need to secure everything tonight." Finn was on his feet immediately. "How long?" "Hours, not days," Charlie said. "Already snowing in the high country. This could be bad." "Right." Finn's expression shifted from relaxed to focused in an instant. "Get the boys up. We need to move the herd from the north pasture down to the protected valley." As the men rushed to prepare for the coming storm, Josephine felt her first real taste of the precariousness of ranch life. In Boston, storms had been inconveniences: snow to be shoveled from sidewalks, ice to be avoided on streets. Here, a winter storm could mean life or death for livestock and livelihoods. "What can I do?" she asked Finn as he pulled on his heavy coat. "Stay inside," he said firmly. "Make sure we have plenty of water drawn in case the pump freezes. And perhaps coffee ready when we return. It's going to be a long night." Josephine nodded, already moving toward the kitchen. "Be careful," she called after him as he headed out into the gathering darkness. The hours that followed were tense. Josephine kept busy, drawing water, stoking the fires in both the kitchen stove and the sitting room fireplace, preparing a hearty stew that could be kept warm for whenever the men returned. All the while, she watched through the windows as the weather deteriorated: first rain, then sleet, and finally heavy, wet snow driven by howling winds. It was past midnight when the men finally returned, stomping snow from their boots on the porch, their faces red with cold and exhaustion. Josephine hurried to serve them hot coffee and bowls of stew, relieved to see all four had returned safely. "Herd secure," Finn reported as he thawed his frozen hands by the fire. "But it's going to be a bad one. Snow's already a foot deep in places, and it's not letting up." "You should all get some rest," Josephine urged. "You've been out for hours." "Someone needs to check the barn every few hours," Finn said. "Make sure the roof's holding. We've got new calves that won't survive if they get wet and cold." "I'll take first watch," Charlie volunteered. "You get some sleep, boss. I'll wake Tom in 3 hours." Finn looked like he might argue, but exhaustion won out. "Wake me if anything changes," he instructed. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. By morning, the ranch was transformed into a white wilderness, with drifts piled against buildings and fences nearly buried. The men took turns checking livestock and reinforcing structures, returning to the house at intervals for hot food and brief rest. Josephine kept the home fires burning, literally and figuratively. She made sure hot meals were always ready, dry clothes available, and the house remained a warm haven from the brutal conditions outside. On the second night of the storm, she was alone in the kitchen, kneading bread dough for the next day, when Finn entered from his latest patrol of the property. "It's easing," he reported, hanging his snow-covered coat by the door. "Stars visible to the west. Should be clear by morning." "Thank goodness," Josephine said, relief evident in her voice. Any losses? 2 calves, he said grimly. Found them too late. But the rest of the herd seems to have weathered it well enough. He came to the table, watching as she worked the dough with strong, steady motions. You've been remarkable through all this. She glanced up, surprised by the compliment. I've done nothing extraordinary. Just kept the home fires burning. That is extraordinary, he said quietly. Having someone to come home to. Someone who cares whether we're cold or hungry or exhausted. It makes all the difference. There was something in his voice of vulnerability she'd never heard before. Their eyes met across the table, and Josephine felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen stove. I do care, she admitted softly. Finn moved around the table slowly, as if giving her time to step away if she wished. When she remained where she was, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. I never expected to find someone like you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. When I saw you on that platform with your trunk, looking so lost and determined all at once, something inside me just knew. Josephine's heart pounded. Knew what? That you were meant to be here. With me. His blue eyes searched hers, seeking confirmation or denial of his feelings. Instead of answering with words, Josephine found herself rising on her toes, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something more urgent, more passionate. Finn's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, while her flower-covered hands found their way to his shoulders, leaving white prints on his shirt that neither of them noticed or cared about. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Finn rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I've wanted to do that since the first week you were here, he confessed. Why didn't you? She asked, her hands still resting on his shoulders. I didn't want you to think it was expected, that your position here depended on anything like that. He opened his eyes, meeting her gaze directly. I wanted you to choose freely. The consideration behind his restraint touched her deeply. How different he was from Arthur Jenkins, who had seen her only as a means to financial gain. Finn had given her security and independence, asking nothing in return except the work they had agreed upon. I do choose freely, she told him. I choose you, Finn Yates. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after the storm, brilliant and full of promise. He kissed her again, more gently this time, but with no less feeling. A discreet cough from the doorway broke them apart. Charlie stood there, snow still clinging to his hat, a knowing smile on his weathered face. Sorry to interrupt, he said, not sounding sorry at all. Just wanted to report the south fence is holding and all the stock in the lower pasture is accounted for. Thank you, Charlie, Finn said, his arm still around Josephine's waist. If he was embarrassed to be caught in such a position, he didn't show it. Charlie nodded, his smile widening. About time, he muttered as he turned to go. Coffee still hot, Miss Josephine? Been a cold night out there. Of course, she said, reluctantly stepping away from Finn to pour Charlie a cup. Her cheeks burned with a blush, but she couldn't suppress her smile. The storm passed by morning, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine white. With the immediate crisis over, the ranch settled back into its routine, though with one significant change: the relationship between the owner and his housekeeper was now openly affectionate. Josephine continued her duties, but now Finn would often find reasons to be in the kitchen when she was cooking, or join her in the garden as she planned the spring planting. Their evenings together took on a new sweetness, with Finn's arm often around her shoulders as he read aloud, or their hands entwined as they talked by the fire. 2 weeks after the storm, Finn rode into town and returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. What's this? Josephine asked as he presented it to her after supper. Open it and see, he said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. Inside the package was a small velvet box. Josephine's heart began to race as she opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. It was my mother's, Finn explained, his voice husky with emotion. My father gave it to her when he asked her to be his wife. Josephine looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. Finn. He took the box from her trembling hands and knelt before her chair. Josephine Garner, I know this isn't the life you imagined when you came west. It's not fancy or sophisticated. The work is hard, and the comforts are simple. but I love you more than I ever thought possible to love another person. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Joy bubbled up within her, bright and effervescent. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Finn Yates, I will marry you." His face lit with happiness as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "It might be forward of me," he said as he rose and pulled her into his arms, "but I was hoping we might be married before Christmas, if that suits you." Josephine laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "That suits me perfectly." Their wedding took place on December 20th, 1873, in the small white church in Yuba City. Snow still blanketed the ground, but the day dawned clear and bright, as if nature itself approved of their union. Mrs. Holloway had helped Josephine alter one of her better dresses, adding lace at the collar and cuffs, and taking in the waist for a perfect fit. With her dark hair arranged in an elegant knot and a small bouquet of evergreen and preserved summer flowers in her hands, she felt as beautiful as any bride in a Worth gown. Finn waited for her at the altar, looking handsome in a new suit, his sandy hair freshly trimmed. The love in his eyes as she walked toward him on Charlie's arm made her heart swell with happiness. The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with Reverend Wallace speaking eloquently about the foundations of a strong marriage: trust, respect, and abiding love. When Finn slipped the gold band onto her finger to join her mother's pearl ring, his hands were steady, but his voice broke slightly on the words, "With this ring, I thee wed." The small reception afterward was held at the Double Y, with Mrs. Holloway overseeing a feast that would be talked about for months. The entire town seemed to attend, eager to celebrate the union of the respected rancher and the Eastern lady who had unexpectedly become part of their community. As twilight fell and the last guests departed, Josephine found herself standing on the porch with Finn, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning against his solid warmth. "I never imagined when I left Boston that I would find this kind of happiness. When I saw you on that platform, your trunk beside you, and that determined look on your face, I knew you were something special," Finn said. "I just didn't know then how special you'd become to me." Josephine turned in his arms to face him. "When you picked up my trunk and said you would take care of me, I was just grateful for the help. I never dreamed you'd become my whole world." Finn's kiss was tender, filled with promise of the future they would build together. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," he whispered against her lips. And home it truly was, not because of the buildings or the land, but because of the love that filled every corner of their shared life. Spring came early to the Double Y Ranch in 1874. As the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in the garden Josephine had carefully planned during the winter months, the changes around the ranch were evident to anyone who visited. Curtains adorned every window of the main house, cheerful fabrics bringing color and warmth to rooms that had once been merely functional. The sitting room had been rearranged around a braided rug Josephine had worked on during the long winter evenings, with Finn's books now properly organized on shelves he had built to her specifications. More significant than the physical changes, however, was the atmosphere of the place. What had once been simply a working ranch was now unmistakably a home filled with conversation, laughter, and the kind of comfortable intimacy that comes when two people are perfectly matched in spirit and purpose. Finn and Josephine worked side by side, each contributing their strengths to their shared enterprise. Finn taught Josephine about cattle and horses, about the rhythms of the land and the seasonal tasks that kept the ranch productive. In return, she brought organization and beauty to their home, transforming it into a haven that renewed his spirit each time he crossed the threshold. On a warm May afternoon, as Josephine was planting the vegetable garden with Mrs. Holloway's assistance, she felt a wave of dizziness that caused her to sit back on her heels, pressing a soil-covered hand to her forehead. "You all right, child?" Mrs. Holloway asked, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "Just a bit lightheaded," Josephine admitted. "It seems to happen in the mornings particularly. I'm sure it's nothing." Mrs. Holloway's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "Nothing, is it? When did you last have your monthly courses?" The blunt question made Josephine blush, but she quickly calculated in her head. "Oh, she said softly as realization dawned. Oh my. That's what I thought, Mrs. Holloway said with satisfaction. You'd best tell that husband of yours he's going to be a father come winter. Josephine waited until after supper that evening, when she and Finn were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him in what had become their favorite way to end the day. Finn, she said, her heart racing with excitement and a touch of nervousness. I have something to tell you. He looked down at her, his blue eyes warm with affection. What is it, love? We're going to have a baby, she said simply. Probably in December, according to Mrs. Holloway's calculations. Finn went completely still for a moment, his expression frozen in surprise. Then, with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral, he leaped to his feet, pulling Josephine up with him and spinning her around on the porch. A baby, he exclaimed, his face alight with wonder. Our baby. Josephine laughed, clinging to his shoulders. Careful, you'll make me dizzy again. He immediately set her down, his expression changing to concern. Are you all right? Should you be resting? Do you need to see the doctor in town? She placed a reassuring hand on his chest. I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know. Not my woman, he said, his hands gentle on her waist. Not carrying my child. He knelt suddenly before her, pressing his ear against her still flat stomach. Hello in there, he said softly. Your pa can't wait to meet you. Tears of happiness filled Josephine's eyes as she cradled his head against her. In that moment, she felt the full circle of her journey from the lonely, desperate young woman stranded on a train platform to this a beloved wife, soon to be a mother, surrounded by the deep and abiding love of a good man. The months that followed were filled with preparations. Finn converted the third bedroom into a nursery, crafting a cradle from oak with his own hands, carving delicate leaf patterns into the headboard. Josephine sewed tiny garments during the quiet afternoons, each stitch a testament to her growing anticipation. As her body changed, growing round with new life, Finn's attentiveness only increased. He insisted on hiring a young woman from town to help with the heavier household tasks, despite Josephine's protests that she was perfectly capable. You're carrying precious cargo, he told her firmly. Let others help with what they can. By November, with the first winter storms threatening in the mountains, Josephine felt ready. The nursery was prepared, tiny clothes folded neatly in the bureau Finn had built, the cradle waiting beside their bed for the first weeks after the birth. Dr. Morgan from Yuba City had been alerted to expect a summons, with Charlie assigned the task of writing for him when the time came. Mrs. Holloway had promised to stay at the ranch for the birth and the weeks following, her experience with bringing new life into the world a comfort to both expectant parents. The first pains began on a snowy December evening as Josephine was helping to clear the supper dishes. She paused, one hand on the table, her face showing momentary discomfort. Josephine. Finn was immediately at her side, concern etched on his features. I think, she said carefully, that your child may be eager to meet us. What followed was a night both endless and fleeting. Charlie rode through the storm to fetch Dr. Morgan, while Finn and Mrs. Holloway prepared the bedroom. Josephine paced as long as she could, breathing through contractions that grew steadily more intense. Finn never left her side, his strong hands supporting her, his voice a constant reassurance in her ear. You're doing wonderfully, love. So strong, so brave. When Dr. Morgan finally arrived, snow melting from his coat and beard, Josephine was deep in the throes of labor. The doctor's calm competence was reassuring, but it was Finn's unwavering presence that gave her strength through the long hours that followed. As dawn broke over the snow-covered ranch, a new cry joined the household, lusty and indignant at being thrust into the cold world. Dr. Morgan placed the swaddled infant in Josephine's arms, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. You have a fine son, Mrs. Yates, he announced. Strong lungs and all his fingers and toes. Josephine looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her child, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. Finn, she whispered, come meet your son. Finn approached the bed almost reverently, his eyes wide with wonder as he gazed at the tiny being nestled in his wife's arms. He's perfect, he breathed, reaching out to touch one small fist that had escaped the swaddling. To everyone's surprise, the infant immediately grasped his father's finger with surprising strength, holding tight as if to announce his arrival and claim his place in the family. "What shall we call him?" Finn asked, his voice rough with emotion. Josephine considered the tiny face, already showing signs of his father's strong features. "What was your father's name?" "James," Finn replied. "James William Yates." "Then that shall be his name too," Josephine decided. James William Yates. A good, strong name for a rancher's son. Finn leaned down to kiss first his son's forehead, then his wife's lips. "Thank you," he whispered against her mouth. "For everything. For getting off that train in Yuba City. For staying. For this miracle." "Thank you for picking up my trunk," she replied with a tired smile. "And for taking care of me, just as you promised." As the winter sun rose higher, casting golden light through the bedroom window, Josephine Yates held her husband's hand and their newborn son, marveling at how a seeming disaster, a missed train, a stranded woman, a deception uncovered had led to this moment of perfect joy. The years that followed brought changes to the Double Y Ranch. Under Finn and Josephine's joint stewardship, the property prospered and expanded. The cattle herd grew, and Finn's dream of orchards became reality with the planting of apple and pear trees along the southern slopes. Young James grew strong and sturdy, his father's son in every way from his sandy hair to his quiet determination. When he was 3, he gained a sister, Elizabeth Rose, named for both grandmothers. She arrived with considerably less drama than her brother, born on a calm spring afternoon with Mrs. Holloway's assistance, while Dr. Morgan was delayed at another birth in town. By 1880, the original ranch house had been expanded to accommodate the growing family. Finn added a second story with proper bedrooms for the children and a small study where Josephine could practice the piano he had surprised her with on their 5th anniversary. The Double Y became known throughout the region for its hospitality as well as its fine cattle. Travelers passing through Yuba City often found themselves invited to Sunday dinner, where Josephine's cooking and Finn's storytelling made for memorable occasions. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1883, 10 years after their first meeting, Finn and Josephine stood on the porch of their home, watching 8-year-old James attempt to teach his 5-year-old sister how to throw a lasso. "Be careful with your sister, James," Josephine called, smiling as her son assumed an exaggerated protective stance. "I'm being careful, Ma," he called back. "Lizzie's tougher than she looks." Finn chuckled, his arm around Josephine's waist. "He's not wrong. She's got your spirit. And your stubbornness," Josephine replied, leaning against his solid warmth. At 40, Finn was still as strong and vital as the day she'd met him, though silver now threaded the sandy hair at his temples. The years of outdoor work had deepened the lines around his eyes and mouth, but to Josephine, he was more handsome than ever, his face now a map of their shared life. Every line a story they had written together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that train hadn't left without you?" Finn asked, his voice thoughtful. Josephine considered the question. "Sometimes. I would have gone to Sacramento, discovered Arthur Jenkins' deception there instead of here. Perhaps I would have found employment in the city. Perhaps you would have met another man, a city man, who could give you fine things and an easier life," Finn suggested. She turned in his arms to face him directly. "I have everything I could ever want right here," she said firmly. "You, our children, our home. There is no finer life than this." The doubt that occasionally shadowed his eyes, the fear that somehow she had settled for less than she deserved, vanished at her words. "I am the most fortunate man alive," he said, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding day. Their moment was interrupted by excited shouts from the children as a wagon appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Charlie was driving, with Mrs. Holloway beside him and what appeared to be a large crate in the wagon bed. "Wonder what that's about," Finn mused as they broke apart. "Weren't expecting deliveries today." As the wagon drew closer, Josephine could see Mrs. Holloway was practically bouncing with excitement, a most unusual state for the normally dignified woman. "What in the world?" Finn started toward the approaching wagon, Josephine at his side. Charlie pulled the team to a halt before the house, grinning widely. "Special delivery from Sacramento," he announced. "And you'll never guess who we ran into at the station." Mrs. Holloway didn't wait for Charlie to help her down, but jumped from the wagon with surprising agility for a woman of her years. "The most extraordinary thing," she exclaimed. "Tell them, Charlie." Charlie's grin widened. Was waiting for the regular supply shipment when the Sacramento train pulled in. Lady gets off, looking lost as can be, asking for directions to find a Mr. Arthur Jenkins. Josephine felt Finn stiffen beside her, his arm tightening protectively around her waist. "I recognized the name right off," Charlie continued. "Told her there was no Arthur Jenkins hereabouts, but that I knew someone who'd had dealings with a man by that name." He gestured toward Josephine. "Figured you might want to talk to her, madam." Before Josephine could respond, a woman descended from the wagon, young, perhaps 20, with a nervous expression and clothes that had once been fine but now showed signs of wear. "This is Miss Julia Sinclair," Mrs. Holloway introduced. "From Philadelphia." "Boston, actually," the young woman corrected softly. "Though I've been living in Philadelphia with my aunt these past 2 years." Josephine stepped forward, extending her hand. "I'm Josephine Yates. This is my husband, Finn. I understand you're looking for Arthur Jenkins." Relief washed over Julia's face at the kind reception. "Yes. He's my fiancé. We've been corresponding for months, and he sent me a train ticket to join him in Sacramento." Her expression clouded. "But when I arrived, no one knew of him. The address he gave me is an empty storefront." The parallel to her own experience 10 years earlier was so striking that Josephine felt momentarily dizzy. Finn's steady hand at her elbow anchored her. "Miss Sinclair," Finn said gently, "I'm afraid you may have been deceived. My wife had a similar experience a decade ago with a man using that name." Julia's face crumpled, and Josephine immediately moved to her side, guiding her to sit on the porch steps. "Did you send him money?" she asked quietly. Tears filled the young woman's eyes. "Yes. My inheritance from my parents, $300. He said it was to establish our home." She looked up at Josephine with dawning horror. "It was all a lie, wasn't it? There is no Arthur Jenkins." "I'm afraid not," Josephine confirmed, her heart aching for this girl who was so similar to her younger self, alone, betrayed, far from home. "What am I to do now?" Julia whispered. "I have nowhere to go, no money to return east." Finn and Josephine exchanged a glance, a wordless communication born of years together. Finn nodded slightly, understanding his wife's unspoken request. "You'll stay with us," Josephine said firmly, taking the girl's cold hands in hers. "Until you decide what you want to do next." "I couldn't impose," Julia protested weakly. "It's not an imposition," Finn assured her. "We have plenty of room, and Mrs. Holloway has been saying for months that she could use help with her dressmaking business in town." "It's true," the older woman confirmed. "My eyes aren't what they used to be for fine stitching. Do you sew, child?" "Yes," Julia said, surprise momentarily overtaking her distress. "I was a seamstress in Philadelphia. It's how I supported myself while living with my aunt." "Then it's settled," Josephine declared. "You'll stay in our guest room tonight, and tomorrow we'll discuss your options. No decisions need to be made immediately." As she spoke, James and Elizabeth approached cautiously, curious about the visitor and the excitement. "James, Elizabeth, this is Miss Sinclair," Josephine introduced. "She'll be staying with us for a time." Always polite, James removed his hat just as his father would have done. "Pleased to meet you, madam." Elizabeth, less restrained, studied the newcomer with frank curiosity. "Did you come on the train?" "I've never been on a train. Pa says when I'm 10 I can go all the way to Sacramento on the train. That's 3 whole years away." She sighed dramatically. Julia couldn't help but smile at the little girl's chatter. "Yes, I came on the train. All the way from Philadelphia." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "That's even further than Sacramento." "Did you see Indians?" "Elizabeth," Josephine admonished gently, "let Miss Sinclair catch her breath before you interrogate her." Finn clapped his hands decisively. "James, Lizzie, go help Charlie unload whatever's in that crate. Miss Sinclair, let's get you settled inside. You must be exhausted from your journey." As the children scampered off and Mrs. Holloway led Julia into the house, Finn drew Josephine aside. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Seeing her must bring back difficult memories. Josephine squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I'm fine. In fact, I'm grateful for the chance to help her avoid the panic I felt." She glanced toward the house. She reminds me so much of myself, desperate enough to travel across the country on the promise of security. The difference is, you had the good fortune to get off at the wrong station, Finn reminded her with a small smile, and find a handsome cowboy to rescue you. Josephine laughed, raising an eyebrow. Is that how you remember it? As I recall, you were quite dusty and not particularly handsome. Wounded, Finn declared, clutching his chest in mock pain. My own wife, impugning my appearance. I said, not particularly handsome then, she clarified, rising on her toes to kiss his cheek. You've improved with age, like fine wine. Their playful moment was interrupted by excited shrieks from the children. Turning, they saw James and Elizabeth dancing around the crate that Charlie had just opened. Ma, Pa, come look, James called. Hand in hand, Finn and Josephine approached the wagon. Inside the crate, carefully packed in straw, was an Edison phonograph, one of the newest models, with a brass horn and several wax cylinders. What in the world? Finn exclaimed. Charlie grinned. 10 years today since you two met. Whole town pitched in. Figured the Yates family deserved something special to mark the occasion. Josephine's hand flew to her mouth in surprise. Oh, Charlie. It's wonderful. The children were beside themselves with excitement. Can we play it now, Pa? James begged. Please. Let's get it inside first, Finn said, carefully lifting the machine from its crate. This is a delicate instrument. The rest of the afternoon was spent setting up the phonograph in the sitting room and listening to the handful of recordings that had come with it, mostly classical pieces and a few patriotic songs. Even Julia was drawn out of her melancholy by the marvel of music emerging from a machine. Later that evening, after the children were in bed and their guest had retired to the spare room, Josephine and Finn stood once more on the porch, looking out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. 10 years, Finn mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I saw you sitting on that trunk, looking so lost and determined. And sometimes, Josephine replied, it feels like I've always been here with you, like my life before was just preparation for this. Finn turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. When I picked up your trunk that day and said I would take care of you, I had no idea how much you would end up taking care of me, of all of us. His voice grew husky with emotion. You've made this place a home, Josephine. You've made my life complete. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features with gentle fingers. And you've given me everything I never knew I wanted: security, yes, but more importantly, love. A family. A purpose. Do you think we should tell Miss Sinclair? Finn asked. About how her situation mirrors yours. Josephine nodded. Tomorrow. She needs to know that what seems like disaster can sometimes be the beginning of something wonderful. Like a trunk left on a platform? Finn suggested with a smile. Exactly like that, Josephine agreed, rising on her toes to kiss her husband beneath the vast California sky, gratitude filling her heart for the twist of fate that had stranded her in Yuba City and into the care of a cowboy with steady hands and a steadier heart. In the years that followed, the story of the trunk left on the platform became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished by the children as they grew, but always with the same essential truth, that sometimes what appears to be misfortune is actually the hand of fate, guiding us toward the happiness we never knew to seek. And Julia Sinclair, who became Mrs. Julia Davis 2 years after her arrival, when she married Charlie in a ceremony on the ranch, would often say that the greatest piece of luck in her life was being deceived by a man who didn't exist, because it led her to people who became more real and dear to her than any she had known before. On their 40th anniversary, with their children grown and grandchildren playing in the yard of the ranch house that had expanded yet again to accommodate the growing family, Finn and Josephine sat in rocking chairs on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and crimson. Any regrets? Finn asked, his hand finding hers as it had countless times over the decades. Josephine smiled, the lines around her eyes crinkling with happiness. Not a single one, she assured him. Every moment, even the difficult ones, led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Me too, love, Finn said softly. Me too. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed, not what they had sought, but what fate, in its infinite wisdom, had known to give them.